Welcome this afternoon. Mr. Jackson has far too many credentials to try to give you without a cheat sheet, so let me go through this. E.W. Jackson served 3 years in the United States Marine Corps before graduating summa cum laude from the University of Massachusetts at Boston. He went on to graduate from Harvard Law School with a Juris Doctor, studied theology at Harvard Divinity School. He practiced small business law for 15 years in Boston while teaching regulatory law as an adjunct professor at the graduate level at the Northeastern University in Boston. In 1997, he retired from his private law practice to dedicate himself to full-time ministry. He founded the Exodus Faith Ministries, a non-denominational Christian church in Chesapeake, Virginia. He also began STAND, which stands for Staying True to America's National Destiny, an organization seeking to restore America's founding values. He published a book entitled 10 Commandments and an Extraordinary Life and launched Exodus, now a project devoted to encouraging the religious black community to leave the Democratic Party. For his service in the ministry, Mr. Jackson was consecrated a bishop in 1998. He chairs the Conservative Emergency Task Force, founded the annual Chesapeake MLK Leadership Breakfast, and served as chaplain for the Boston Red Sox, which I didn't know. All the other are very important, but wow, on the Boston Red Sox. And started the nonprofit organization Youth with a Destiny, which helps young people avoid gangs, drugs, and violence. He has received many awards for his leadership and community service, including the Outstanding Outreach Effort of the Year from the Republican Party of Virginia in 1910. In May of 2011, Mr. Jackson sought the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate. While his efforts weren't successful at that time, he is now a candidate for Lieutenant Governor for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And let me just say, I've been very impressed by what I've seen from Mr. Jackson. I'm the first vice chairman of the Loudoun County Republican Party as well. And so I ran the floor for the, at the convention in May. And Mr. Jackson, his team, the organization, the way it ran was very, very impressive. One of the things, though, that really impressed me is he came in not as he was sort of the underdog there. There were 7 candidates for lieutenant governor. And when you have 7 candidates, you never know what's going to happen. And he comes in, there's some front runners who are fairly big names ready to go, and watched as his organization worked just systematically through the whole process. And then as the candidates spoke, they all spoke very, very well. But when Mr. Jackson spoke, you could discern a wave over that convention floor. And then it was very, very interesting to watch as ballot after ballot he continues to climb until he finally secures the nomination. So help me welcome E.W. Jackson.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking time from a very busy schedule to come here to communicate with these students and with our world readers around the country.
Well, I love talking to students, so it's an honor.
All right. I've read your own words that you grew up a juvenile delinquent in Chester, PA.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, look, I was born into a dysfunctional family. My mother and father were not together per se, and the relationship had been off and on, and I guess around the time I was born it was finally coming to a final conclusion. And as a result of the conflict between them, I ended up shipped around for the first 2 years from one foster home to another, none of which I remember. I've been told that. But then at the age of 2, I landed in the home of Rebecca and Willie Mollett, illiterate couple, very loving people, but also poor. And so, you know, he was a sandblaster. She was a maid. And they loved me dearly, but I was resentful of the fact that my parents weren't there, and they simply, as I got older, they couldn't control me.
Yeah.
That's what led to the juvenile delinquency. Yeah, I think the same thing is what's happening in cities across the Commonwealth right now, and of course across the country, where you have young men whose fathers are not there, and in some cases their mothers are there, but really in absentia, and they don't have any guidance. They're resentful, they're angry, they're frustrated. And unfortunately, they end up acting out. That's what I would have done had my father not finally come back into my life in a very dramatic way at the age of 9 1/2.
Okay, what happened then?
Well, I think, frankly, as my dad later explained to me, he always wanted me, but he felt that he couldn't take care of a young child and work full time as well. That would be dangerous for me. He had no way of working it out. Once I got old enough, I was reaching that adolescent stage, he thought that I could handle the 2 hours after school until he got home, and that it was worth trying. And I think also, which he later explained to me, he felt if he didn't do something at that point, I was going to be lost to the streets forever.
So how was high school for you? I asked that on Monday. We had Christina Hoff Sommers, who's a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and has written a book called The War Against Boys, and talking about how schooling is not really made for boys and so forth. Did you like high school?
You know, actually, I did. I did. My dad was not a wealthy man, but he loved me and wanted me to have the best that he could provide. And so my father promised me that if I got straight A's, that he would give me a car. Well, he couldn't afford a car. He had a 1960 Catalina Pontiac.
All right.
And when I got straight A's and could drive, my father turned the car keys over to me, said, "It's your car now. I promised it to you, you've earned it." So needless to say, driving around high school in a black 1960 Catalina Pontiac made me a big man on campus. Right. And so, yeah, I did enjoy it. You know, school was very different then than it is now. I mean, you know, the worst things that happened were fights, stink bombs, you know, throwing chewing gum. I mean, we didn't have guns in school. Nobody went to school concerned about whether they would be shot that day or whether they would be killed on the way home. So it was a very different environment, even though it was a poor community, and I lived in what would be described as the ghetto. I mean, the poorest part of Chester.
Chester, kind of a tough place.
Chester was tough. Oh, yeah. Chester was tough. It was, you know, it was a big gambling town. It was a big industrial town. You had a lot of shipyard workers. You had aluminum rentals. You had Scott Paper Company. You had Sunoco. So you had a lot of very hardworking, working class people. And you know what it's like in a working class community. I mean, you know, you kind of fight and scrap your way through. So that's certainly the way I grew up.
Did scrapping through then prepare you for the Marines?
Well, I guess in a sense it did, but I would really give the credit more to my dad, because he instilled in me a sense that you don't quit, you don't give up, you don't use excuses, you don't blame other people. You know, you meet the challenges of life and you overcome them, and you don't quit until you do. My father used to always say to me, "I want you to reach for the stars. If you don't land on the stars," he said, "maybe you'll land on the moon." He said, "but I can guarantee you this, if you don't reach, you'll never get anywhere." And he said, "and don't ever come back to me with excuses." So you can imagine what it was like for a man who was a welder, third-class welder in a shipyard with a 6th grade education, to see his son get a Harvard Law degree. I mean, so, but I really give the credit to him and to the Lord for allowing that to happen.
And in the Marines, you were stationed at some point in the Boston area, or how did that work?
I was stationed in the Marine Corps at Naval Air Station South Weymouth, which is just a few miles outside of Boston. That's how I ended up in Boston for so many years.
Okay, and then you were able to go to Harvard Law.
Yeah, I got out of the Marine Corps. I tell people, you know, I went in the Marine Corps, boy, I came out a man. Because when I went in, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something with my life, but I had no idea what. By the time I came out, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And within a fairly short time, I knew I wanted to go to Harvard Law School because I'd been told Harvard was the best. And so I said, well, if that's the best, that's where I want to go. Let me tell this as an interesting aside. When I got ready to apply to law school, and by the way, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying this to in any way brag on myself. I think it's a testament to the human spirit and to what is possible, particularly in this country, if you apply yourself. I did not get turned down from one school, not one. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Michigan, Berkeley, UVA, every school I applied to accepted me. I did very well on the LSATs, and I had an outstanding academic record. Then I was a Marine Corps veteran as well, so I had a family that was a little different than most students. But when I got ready to apply to Harvard Law School, some very well-meaning professors, who I, by the way, liked and respected and admired, told me, well, you know, that's good, that you want to do that, but don't get your hopes up. Because, you know, black people don't do well on standardized tests in America because they're culturally biased against you. And I'm thinking back, you know, according to my father, my great-grandfather was born in Virginia, in America, in 1798. That puts my ancestry here over 200 years at least. I think I've had time to enculturate. You know, all that did was just stiffen my resolve, because when they told me that, I said, okay, well, we'll see. We'll see about that. And one of the things that concerns me, Marvin, is, you know, this victimization mindset. You know, frankly, if I thought it helped people, I'd say, fine, go at it. But it doesn't. It debilitates people. It makes them feel incapable, handicapped. The world is against you. There's systemic racism. They won't let you. We ought to be telling people, sure, there are obstacles. Race could be one of them. But the question is, what are you going to do with your life? And because that's what it all comes down to ultimately.
Yeah. I was interviewing Ted Cruz a while ago, concerning his Harvard Law experience and President Obama's Harvard Law experience. And Ted was saying, you don't need any esoteric explanations to understand why Obama does what he does. He's just reflecting what he learned at Harvard Law School. Was that your experience?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Of course, I got converted in the middle of Harvard Law School.
Okay.
And that's what saved me. That's the reason why I didn't drink the entire pitcher of Kool-Aid. I ended up regurgitating a lot of it after I got saved. I gave my life to Jesus Christ in the semester, after the first semester of my second year. When I came back a very different person. And that helped me to see through a lot of what I was being told. It was a process.
How did that conversion happen?
Well, you know, my dad, who I've already said is the most important and influential person in my life other than Jesus, got saved late.
Okay.
He got saved, I think it was in his early 60s. I was already adult. I had been taken to church by my foster parents, but not by my dad. So I had some rooting and grounding in church, in the Baptist church in particular, but I'd gotten completely away from it. And my father said to me one day, you know what I'm doing? Excuse me, you know what I'm doing? I said, what? He said, I'm reading the Bible from cover to cover. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting idea. And I'm thinking, now this is the way I'm thinking consciously. I think beneath the conscious level, something else was going on. But consciously, I'm thinking, you know, the Bible's one of the great books. Any intellectual, any intelligent person ought to know something about what it says, which, by the way, would be a good idea for press people today. But I decided that I'm going to do that. Man, that sounds like an interesting thing. And I thought, if it comes up at cocktail parties, I'll be able to comment intelligently on it.
Right.
Little did I know. I mean, I got in the middle of it, and I came under conviction. Conviction. I mean, I still get emotional about it. Because all my life, I've been looking for answers, looking for the truth. I'm a reasonably intelligent young man. And man, when I found Jesus, wow, I finally found the truth. I mean, this was ultimately what life was all about.
Yeah.
In fact, on the morning that I came to this realization, I started that in September of 1976. On the morning I came to that realization, it was December 22nd, 1976. My wife was in my son's room sweeping the floor. I walked in. I woke up that morning. There's an old song that says, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus. And I woke up that morning, and for me, the question of God's reality was forever answered. I mean, I didn't see God visibly, but the presence of God was so powerful, so cleansing, so real, that I walked in, I tapped my wife on the shoulder. I said, you know what? She said, what? Now, my wife, I had not gone to church. She did. I had not gone to a prayer meeting. She was. I was not talking about God to her. She was coming home with Bible lessons and this, that, and the other. And I said, you know, I think I'm saved. She dropped the broom and spun and said, what? I said, I don't know how else to explain it. I said, but God is doing something in my life. I said, where have you been going to church? Because on Sunday, I'm going to church with you. My wife stepped back 2 feet, looked me up and down and said, you're not going with me. Because she really thought that Harvard Law School had gotten the best of me, and the poor fella had a nervous breakdown. So that Sunday, I went to church by myself because I was going. I sat up in the balcony of St. Paul AME. I'll never forget it. When Reverend Brandon gave the call to receive Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, I felt like I sprinted to the altar and just lay there and wept and just wailed because the load of sin was being lifted off of me. And, I found out that you can look good on the outside. People can be all impressed. Oh, look at him, Harvard Law School student. Isn't he wearing a nice suit? But inside you're full of dead men's bones and all corruption. And of course, my life was changed forever. I went back to school in January. And when my friends found out what happened, that old saying, you got to figure out how to distance yourself from friends who might mislead you. I didn't have to distance myself. They distanced themselves. And I say walking down the hallways of Harvard Law School was like the parting of the Red Sea. They would say, here he comes, get away from him, or he'll talk to you about Jesus. And I would. Yeah. That's how it happened.
Interesting. End of 1976 was also the time that I first professed faith in Christ. And I've been going to the University of Michigan, and my professors thought that they had thought originally for some reason that I was smart, and then they figured somehow my brains had just totally fallen out.
Right. So, yes, I've had that experience too. Right.
Okay, now what I really want to ask you about is your chaplaincy of the Red Sox, because I grew up in Boston, and you were chaplain of the Red Sox for 5 years?
I was.
What years were those?
I think that was about from 87, 88 until about 93, I think. Okay. Somewhere in there. It was during the time that Mo Vaughn was there, Oil Can Boy was there part of that time. Sure. Jose Canseco, of course, Roger Clemens was there during that time. Jim Rice was there. And it was a great opportunity. I wasn't the only chaplain, by the way, and you only do this during home games. But there were several of us who would go and do chaplaincies for the Red Sox, and I was one. And it was a lot of fun. And by the way, one of the things I remember most, Roger Clemens never missed a service. Never. There were others who were often too busy. Not once was Roger Clemens ever too busy to attend the service.
Yeah, I interviewed him in 1994, and he talked about his childhood growing up and without a dad, but going with his mom and brothers to church and so forth. And he talked about how he missed that and so forth. So who knows what happens over the years. But
well, look, it's just a privilege. Look, my dad was a great baseball fan. I've got a daughter who is just a rabid baseball fan. I like baseball. I'm not a rabid fan. So I came in looking for an opportunity to minister. And I think, for people like that, they're so accustomed to folks wanting to use them and wanting to get something from them. So it's just a tremendous opportunity to pour into the lives of people who I know influence others.
And so you're practicing as a lawyer.
Yes.
And also then pastoring.
Yes.
And at a certain point then you decide, I'm going to spend the time on pastoring and drop the law. Is that the way?
Well, I was also doing a third thing.
Okay.
Which was managing a gospel radio station.
Okay.
So I had 3 full-time jobs. Only the young. So I was really committed to the idea, and you all may know that one of the accusations that's been made against me is, well, he had a bankruptcy. That bankruptcy occurred around that radio station. I was trying to bring Boston its first and only gospel radio station. And I remind people, it never had one before, it hasn't had one since, which means it's a tough market. But I was trying to carve out a niche for a radio station that could bring black gospel music to the community. And by the way, I found out doing that, black folks aren't the only ones who listen to black gospel music.
Right.
I mean, a lot of Jews would come by the station and say, I love gospel music. Say, okay, great. So it was amazing to me. But I fought with the FCC for 10 years, trying to get the license renewed. Because what happened was that the license had been thrown into abeyance, suspended, if you will, because an R&B station petitioned the FCC and said, we don't need a gospel station. Let us take a frequency nearby them, eliminate them, and we will do 24-hour R&B, and we'll throw out some gospel music on Sundays, which is all you really need. Okay. And so that was the battle, the FCC deciding, well, does the community need gospel or does it not need gospel? And of course, we all know that the government is eminently qualified to make that judgment.
That's right.
Well, I finally renewed the license, but it really personally bankrupted me in the process, and my wife, because we poured our all into it. And part of leaving the law practice was to be able to devote my full time to the church and to that radio station.
Okay. And then you come to Virginia for church founding purposes,
Yes.
and now find yourself in this campaign and so forth.
Yeah, you know, God is interesting.
Yeah.
Certainly not what I came down here for. In fact, you know, people have said, because I've stated it myself, that I was looking for a more compatible environment. My wife and I are conservative. Massachusetts is not.
It is tough, yeah.
So, you know, we wanted to be someplace where we felt that our values were affirmed rather than attacked. So, you know, we left Massachusetts and moved to America. That's a joke, folks. That's a joke. And, you know, found out that the same problems are really just moving through the entire country.
Well, same problems, and now you have to deal with the Washington Post rather than the Boston Globe.
Yes.
But I just wanted to ask you, I tend to look at press coverage, and I found this very interesting. I just want to read you a statement. This is what you wrote in the Washington Times in October 2012. And then I'll read a statement from the Washington Post last Sunday as they are talking in a way about what you wrote. So here's the statement of the Washington Times. Democrats now have fully embraced an abortion policy that amounts to infanticide. They have also made the lesbian, homosexual, bisexual, transgender agenda their vision for America. How have they managed to hold on to black Christians in spite of an agenda worthy of the Antichrist? Okay, that's what you wrote in the Washington Times. And I find it interesting that the Washington Post referring to that, it's in the first sentence, but their editorial condemning you. E.W. Jackson, the Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, to E.W. Jackson, the Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Democrats are agents of the Antichrist. Now, notice there's a difference here. It's a subtle in some way, but actually not that much. Your statement was, how have they managed to hold on to black Christians in spite of an agenda worthy of the Antichrist? And the Washington Post transposed that into your saying that Democrats are agents of the Antichrist. A difference. How do you compete with the Washington Post that buys ink by the barrelful?
Well, they buy ink by the barrelful, but fortunately, not many people are reading it.
Okay.
So I think we've got an opportunity to speak directly to the hearts of people. Look, they twisted a statement I made about the Democrat Party that, you know, Jackson believes that if you're a Democrat, you can't be a Christian.
Right.
I never said that either. My father, as far as I know, remained a Democrat until the time he died. I was a Democrat before I switched over and became a Republican, and I was a Christian. I didn't switch parties immediately. It took a while for me to realize my values were incompatible with the Democrat Party. This is what I have found out, Marvin. It's been a kind of an awakening for me. You know, it's not just a matter of people being against you politically and not agreeing with you. What I'm finding is that the press had, most of them, of course you can't make that a universal blanket statement, but most of them have no frame of reference for understanding Christianity. I mean, so it's almost as if you're speaking a foreign language or that you came from another planet.
Right.
So the references I used there, Christians would immediately understand. But I asked a reporter one time when he was questioning me about some of these things, I said, well, are you a Christian? And he immediately, oh, no, I'm just kind of, you know, I'm kind of every place. I'm everywhere. And I thought, and there's the problem. I think reporters would do themselves well to at least try to understand Christians and what we believe and what we think. And probably you didn't mention this one, but in my book, I mentioned the doctrine of original sin in this way. I said that basically everything from storms to birth defects are all the result of sin. Sin has damaged the entire cosmos. They took the last part of that and said, Jackson believes that parents who have children with birth defects have those children because they sin. I mean, which is so far from anything I've ever believed, taught. I mean, those are almost fighting words for a person of faith to suggest that we ought to know better than that. But that's what we face. So look, what I've told people is the Constitution of Virginia provides that a religious person should not be disadvantaged in civil discourse on the basis of the beliefs he holds as part of his religion. They tried to do that to Jack Kennedy. They tried to do it to Mitt Romney. I defended him and said, look, I know he's not, an Orthodox Christian from our theological point of view, but he's not running to be pastor or theologian.
Right.
He's running to be president, and the question is, how will he govern? So I've tried to make that same case and to also say that I will be the lieutenant governor for all Virginians, whether they agree with me or not, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, black, white, rich, poor. I think that's what our government calls for, and that's what I intend to do.
Yeah, Jesus certainly dealt with that question of the origins of sin when he was asked directly, this bad thing happened, why? Was it their sin? Was it their parents' sin? And so forth. So,
exactly.
So you'd expect a certain level of basic theological literacy, but it's just not there.
40 or 50 years ago probably would have been there,
yeah.
But it's not today.
Yeah, I'll give you another, this is, as I was just comparing your statements in the Washington Post. The Washington Post, or you had said that you talked about the unholy alliance between certain so-called civil rights leaders and Planned Parenthood, which has killed unborn black babies by the tens of millions. It's true. Planned Parenthood has been far more lethal to black lives than the KKK ever was. And in terms of the numbers, that's not irrefutable. The Washington Post turned this into slavery and the Ku Klux Klan were no great threat to African Americans compared to that posed by Planned Parenthood and the welfare state. So basically, the Washington Post transposed that into almost you were saying nice things about slavery and the Ku Klux Klan, and an apologist for the KKK. So strange.
Well, look, my great-grandparents were slaves and sharecroppers in Orange County, Virginia. I'm profoundly sensitive to that part of our history. I come at it differently because I believe that this is a providential country and that all of our ancestors came here in some sense out of a calling, that America is not an evolutionary or historical accident. The founding fathers believed that this nation was providential. And so I don't obsess about the past. I recognize it, but I want to bring people together for a better future. We say in our Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I believe that stuff. And I think that's what we ought to all be working toward.
Yeah. Let me just ask one other thing about press coverage, about your opponent, the State Senator Ralph Northam. According to the Washington Post, he has a reputation for considered judgment. What's his position on abortion?
Oh, he is absolutely pro-abortion without any restrictions, which is amazing for someone who's appealing.
No restrictions at all. So
to my knowledge,
and that's considered judgment.
He believes that interferes with the reproductive rights of women. So, but they don't call that position extreme. Yeah. But look, since you brought up my opponent, you'll be pleased to know, it should be around the internet, that in our debate last night, he's caught on stage looking at me smiling, giving me a thumbs up. So I said, I guess Ralph Northam is even seeing the light.
So he's going to vote for you, I suspect.
Well, I wouldn't put it past him.
Right. Let's see, I have a few more questions, but I suspect a lot of you have questions. And students first, any thoughts you'd like to say or ideas? If you don't speak up quickly, I'll probably ask some more questions. But I'd rather have you do it.
Don't be shy.
Looks like you've won every vote here. But let me just ask this. This was in the previous debate where you talked about how the institutionalization of the mentally ill has gone too far in some cases, that some patients should be institutionalized. Tell us more about that, because that's not something you hear about in political contests every day, but it's important.
And it's sad because I was immediately attacked for that, as if I'd said something that was just so bizarre. I looked at an ODU study. It showed that mental health professionals last year, 2010, 2011, wrote 200 temporary detention orders for people that they considered to be a danger to themselves and to others, asking for hospitalization. You know how many of them were hospitalized? Zero. They're sent back out on the street. And the profession calls it streeting and talks about how unhealthy it is for not only for that person, obviously, but for the community as a whole. So it looks like the mental health profession is on my side on this, that sure, can't lock up everybody. My wife might have put me away when she found that I was saved, you know. But we do need to be aware when people are having suicidal and homicidal ideation and delusions, that's a red flag that's got to be addressed. And I can't believe that the average person, even if they identify themselves as a Democrat, Republican, Independent, thinking about their own family, doesn't say, well, of course, I don't want my wife going to the supermarket and some guy who ought to be institutionalized or hospitalized is out there because he thinks there's some low radio wave frequency that's harassing him, and he's got to kill everybody as a result. I mean, so it's just common sense. I think we got to come back to some common sense rather than political correctness.
So you think in the wake of the Washington Navy Yard shooting that this would be a subject that would be on people's minds and they'd want to do something. But no, because you had the strange alliance of people, in a sense, on the cultural left, plus folks who just wanted to cut budgets and not care about the consequences. And you had all these institutions closing down and lots of crazy folks essentially on the street and sometimes killing themselves, sometimes killing others.
Well, it's a difficult problem. I've been looking very hard at the issue of transportation here in Northern Virginia. That's a major issue. And public-private partnerships have been a tremendous help in financing some of the work that we desperately need done. There's a lot more to be done. And even the last transportation bill didn't cover all the work that needs to be done and doesn't even begin to cover it. I think we ought to be looking at public-private partnerships. We ought to be looking at nonprofit institutions. We ought to be looking at nonprofit clinics. There are people out there who have loved ones who have problems. Some of them are very wealthy. They want to give to help people like that. I think that we as Americans have got to go back to solving problems without the government always stepping in and taxing everybody in order to do it. So I'd like to explore those as possibilities for addressing some of these issues.
Okay, and I'll ask you one horse race question. Months ago until the election, at least by what polling information we have and so forth, you're way behind right now. How are you going to catch up?
No, actually, no. The polls show us in a statistical dead
Really?
heat.
Okay.
Yes, the polls show us. I think we've had 5 polls. They've shown us anywhere from 1% difference to 4% difference, which is even within the margin of error.
Okay.
So we're clearly in a statistical dead heat, and I believe that what the Richmond Times, I think it was the Richmond Times, dubbed Jackson's invisible army is out there waiting to go to the polls. So I feel very good about the race, and I'm looking forward to November 5th.
Okay. Questions?
My sister is adopted and she's black, and we've had several people tell us that, or several other black friends tell us that she should have her own culture and she should be dressing differently because she's black and this is her culture. So you mentioned that, you know, your ancestors were slaves and that people told you, well, you can't go to Harvard because there's racial barriers. Do you believe that blacks have sort of a separate culture or should be treated differently in any respect, whether or not that means they can get the same job or not?
Well, it's sort of 2 questions there. Do I believe that black folks have a separate culture? I think that every ethnic group that's come to America comes with its own sort of cultural beauty, if you will. I mean, I think that's what makes us a great country. You know, I have gone to Riverdance and just sat there in awe, you know, watching these Irish dancers. I mean, it's beautiful. I think we can celebrate the different cultures, but we have to remember we're one America. And so in that sense, I don't think there should ever be any sort of barrier. Whites adopting black children adopting white children. If they're going to give that child love and caring, we ought not think that way. And by the way, of course, you already know this, but as Christians, we are specifically taught against this, that in Christ there's neither neither bond nor free, neither Jew nor Gentile, neither male nor female, but all are one in Christ. So we, I think, have to demonstrate to our countrymen and to the world what it's like to not see color, but to be looking for the heart of the person and the character of the person. So God bless your parents, and tell them they get a thumbs up from me.
Now, it seems that a lot of people look at color, and a lot of black churchmen look at color when it comes to endorsing, supporting, campaigning for President Obama, even though his views are very decidedly different than those of the church. Why is that? And I know you were, at least from what I've read, you were optimistic in the last election that there'd be a change there, that President Obama would lose lots of African American votes, but it doesn't seem that happened.
Well, I wasn't that optimistic.
Okay.
Because I didn't have very much time to try to make the case. Remember, look, I'm not against Democrats and for Republicans or against this group. I'm for the truth. I'm for the truth. And whoever is telling the truth, that's who I stand with. I'm sure all of you do the same. I pray for President Obama. I love him. I think about him sometimes, and I really feel badly for him, because I think that he really needs a powerful God impact in his life. Mm-hmm. That's what I pray for as a minister. But look, we've got to figure out a way to transcend the barriers that have come between us. And part of the problem that we have is that for Americans of African descent, there is the emotional, not just the intellectual, but the emotional history of slavery and Jim Crow, handed down through oral history and told to their friends. I was in Norfolk one time, and a friend of mine who was with me was pointing out a building. He said, my parents came, and they held up in that building during the massive resistance and met trying to figure out what, and you could see, even though he wasn't there, he hadn't been born, but you could see it was emotional for him to even tell it. Mm-hmm. So I think part of what has to happen is a kind of healing. That's why I'm so hopeful about the church, that Christians understand what it is to forgive and to let go and not keep rehearsing that history. But the people who want to use others, whether they're black or Hispanic or what they might be, that's what they look for. They look for an emotional trigger point, an emotional button to push. And race is the button that sadly is pushed to try to make sure that black folks who share my same convictions biblically, but will not vote sometimes for a person of my party because they'll say, well, yeah, I may agree with you on a whole host of things, but those people are against me and they're against my kind. So we've got to explode that myth, and believe me, I'm working very hard at that.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming and speaking to us today about your life story. I had one question. I wasn't sure if you mentioned it and I just didn't catch it or something, but what motivated you to decide to run for lieutenant governor?
Well, I can say this here, even though there's a tracker here, and everything that I say they take back to the mainstream media. But because of course you all heard even Bill O'Reilly when he said, he woke up with an idea about killing Jesus, that he came from the Holy Spirit, and a reporter said, so what makes you think you're the chosen one? Well, see, that's what I mean about no frame of reference. Right. They don't understand that all Christians believe God speaks to us. He doesn't come sit on our bed and tap us on the shoulder, but in our hearts we come to conviction about things. We come to believe, okay, this is something God wants me to do. And I really came to that conviction, but it was born of a deep love for this country and a deep anguish over the direction in which it's going. See, I really believe that if this nation sticks to its constitutional principles and sticks to its Judeo-Christian values, we do that without hatred or venom or bigotry or anger toward others, just do it to stand on the truth, that the favor of God that gave us this nation will remain upon us. I think on the other hand, if we decide, throw all the old rules out, we don't really care what the Constitution says, we don't really care what the Declaration says, as some have suggested, our rights don't come from our Creator, we all know that. I think we're headed down a very, very dark road in this country, and my wife would catch me complaining. This was my lovely wife for 43 years. And one day she said to me, well, what are you going to do about it? I said, And struggling with whether to run, I tell you, the final piece was when my wife said to me, "You need to do this. You need to do this." Because my wife is a very private person. And when she said that, I kind of said, well, God, I guess I'm kind of out of excuses, aren't I? Because this is not the kind of thing you want to do without your wife's full support. So that's how I've come to it. And that's the cause. And that's why I don't spend time attacking other people, because that's not what brought me into this. What brought me into this is a positive vision for what this nation is and where I believe we should go, and wanting to be a part of fighting to make sure that that vision, which I believe the founding fathers had, is what's ultimately expressed.
Let me ask you about what I guess some people would see as an attack. I tend to see it more as analyzing a situation. You wrote in 2010 that President Obama has a Muslim perspective on the world. He has Muslim sensibilities. He sees the world in Israel from a Muslim perspective. So tell us about that and what you see there, and where do you think it comes from?
Well, look, first of all, I made a similar statement. It was one of the most volatile statements, one would think, that anybody could make. But guess who I got it from? It was Geraldo Rivera who said, yeah, I like the president's Muslim sensibilities. In fact, he then went on to say, I think his Muslim vibe is going to help us in the Middle East. Look, he grew up in Indonesia. I don't know why that is seen as an attack. I didn't say he is a Muslim. I just said he does have Muslim sensibilities. Now, it is what it is. He's the president of the United States. There's nothing to be said or done for that. I do think what is happening, frankly, in our country right now is that everything is acceptable in religious terms and protected other than Christianity. Mm-hmm. Christianity is anathema. Because even the claim of exclusivity, the last attack that the press issued against me was something they got from a sermon at a church, in which I declared, of course, just what the Bible says. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me." I was attacked for disrespecting other people's religion. Well, preachers all over this Commonwealth are probably doing that every Sunday morning when they preach Christ and Him alone. So I just think that we need to take a deep breath, and that our fellow countrymen need to realize that Judeo-Christian principles are the bedrock of this country. Doesn't mean we can shove other people out or shove them around. It does mean that those of us who hold to those values shouldn't be shoved out or shoved around. And I think, unfortunately, that's what's happening now, a sort of growing religious persecution, if you will. It hasn't reached the point of violence, thank God, but it's clear in many aspects of the culture that being a Christian and holding to a biblical worldview is a thing of ridicule.
So how has that Muslim perspective affected Obama's policies? Do you see a connection between that sensibility and the particular policies he's been pushing?
Well, I think it's clear that he was the first president that I can think of. I don't think even Jimmy Carter went this far. The first president who basically treated Israel and the Palestinians as equivalent. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think many would argue that he treated the Palestinians as if they were the oppressed group, which is sort of a mantra of the left, that Israel is the abusive group and the Palestinians are the oppressed group. Mm-hmm. I think that comes from that perspective. I think his willingness to talk to Iran, even after having been disrespected and basically used, and I think his willingness to do so is because he believes that he has a special connection to these folks that will eventually be recognized. And I think he said as much in Cairo in his speech. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think most presidents could have given that speech, but he was able to give the speech and able to articulate Arabic phrases with perfect elocution and intonation. So, look, I don't even think that's a hateful statement. I think it's just a statement of fact. Look, frankly, if it helped us, I say, well, great. but I don't think it's helping us.
Question over here.
Hi, my name is Bree, and I am a journalism major here at the school. One thing that I wanted to ask you was, when you go to Google E.W. Jackson, the first thing that, as you start to type, it's, E.W. Jackson yoga. So I just wanted to know if you could maybe comment or explain that a little bit.
Well, this is another one. In my book, I talk about Christian meditation. And of course, I point out that Christians do not empty ourselves. We seek to fill ourselves on the Word of God, meditate on the things of God. And I made the statement that, it's not like the Maharishi Yoga. I was using that as a name, not like the Maharishi Yoga who teaches his followers to empty themselves. And I said, if you empty yourself, you open yourself up to be filled with all the wrong things. So all of a sudden now, if you do yoga, you're satanic. So that's how that was interpreted. Now, what they didn't bother to tell anybody and what nobody bothered to investigate is that my daughters do yoga. I have a minister at my church who teaches yoga. I mean, look, folks, sometimes it's so exasperating, you just have to laugh about it. Because they're just looking for anything they can find to try to paint me as extreme or out of touch, crazy even. And it's pretty sad that rather than the press being committed to trying to get the facts out and inform the voters, they instead have an agenda. And right now their agenda apparently seems to be to stop me. So I guess we will soon see whether they win or Jackson's invisible army wins. I'm putting my hope on the Lord and on Jackson's invisible army.
Yeah, you're right about the emptying out. This wasn't yoga, but when I was teaching a comparative religion course, I checked out a Buddhist meditation place, and the folks there told me first thing, take your glasses off, which did not allow me to read anything at that point. Whereas if you went to Christian meditation, the idea would be to put your glasses on to be able to read God's word and then meditate on that. So, does it madden you when folks equate the gay rights movement with the civil rights movement?
Well, it troubles me deeply, and in my view, it ought to trouble any American, and particularly ought to trouble Black Americans, because just think about the speciousness of that analogy. Black folks were enslaved in this country from about 1660. Originally came in 1619 as primarily indentured servants. A lot of people don't know that. But the original Black folks, African folks who came here were not slaves. They were indentured servants. Mm-hmm. Later, it became lifetime servitude because it frankly met some of the economic needs that people had. And then, you see slavery ended effectively in 1865, and then you have Jim Crow for another 100 years. You have the circumstance in some parts of the country where a Black person can simply walk into a room, and just because of the color of their skin, they're unaccepted. That is so different than what we are facing with the homosexual rights movement. Nobody is interested in persecuting homosexuals, hurting homosexuals, bullying homosexuals. I mean, I stand against all of that stuff. But I think much of the advance of this effort has been based on analogizing it to the experience of the Black community. And there really isn't any experience. As I said in many groups, I said, when I walked into this room, I guarantee you nobody leaned over and said, is he Black? Mm-hmm. I wonder. We don't even ask those questions about people's sexuality because, frankly, most Americans don't care. We know it's none of our business. We want people to live. We want them to be free. Look, we want people to do what we think will be helpful to them and productive for them rather than destructive. And so certainly as individuals, we try to persuade people to do what is right. But this idea that it is like being Black, and if you oppose same-sex marriage, you are a hater and a bigot, I just find that so abhorrent. We as Christians are charged to love people. Jesus said, if you salute those who salute you, then what makes you different than anybody else? We're supposed to love people who don't love us. So hating people is completely out of the question. Unfortunately, those who have an agenda of overturning our constitutional amendment and advancing the cause of same-sex marriage, they don't really care what's really in your heart. What they really care about is winning. And if winning means vilifying anybody who's opposed to them, sadly, that is what they'll do.
I'll ask another question. I'm puzzled, unless it's just winning. I'm puzzled at the alliance between many black leaders and Planned Parenthood, since Planned Parenthood is killing a higher percentage of black babies than that of any other racial or ethnic group. And you'd think, gee, well, why is that? Why is there that alliance? Is it just power, money, or what's going on?
You know that our civil rights leaders, I think certainly Jesse Jackson, I think at one point Al Sharpton as well, used to be pro-life. I wonder what converted them. Yeah, I have a feeling that it's probably a combination of things. Acceptance, of course, in the Democrat coalition, because in the Democrat coalition, my understanding is now that if you are opposed to homosexual marriage, you can never expect to hold any kind of position in the Democrat Party. You are not accepted. You must embrace that fully. I don't see any way of resolving that issue, frankly, other than some sort of major movement in the country that settles the issue once and for all.
Yeah. Earlier this year, Kate Coles-James was sitting in the chair you're sitting in now, and you know, she was talking about some of her experiences with Republican leadership, and wasn't real thrilled with the willingness of the GOP hierarchy to invest actually in the African American community. There was a tendency to write off those voters and thus not fund things, not care about things, and so forth. I mean, what are you finding?
Well, what I'm finding is we're doing very well.
Okay.
Because, you know, we're reaching out to black folks and letting them know that I care about them, and that there are many people in the Republican Party. I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but there are many people in the Republican Party who care. They just don't know what to do. They don't know how to overcome it. So I'm going to be talking to them over the next 30 days about a number of things that I think go to the heart of some of the problems that are being experienced in the black community. Look, I think, Marvin, everything rises and falls on leadership. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Jesus changed the world because he is the Son of God. But you can see God using individuals. Sometimes when an individual stands up, that individual doesn't achieve the things that he or she would like, but you inspire other people. And my hope is that in doing this, we'll begin to break those barriers down, and people will stop thinking in terms of party and start thinking in terms of principle and the person, and really try to look more deeply than what the mainstream media or some political operative says about a person, but try to look deeply and understand, who is this person? What's in this individual's soul? So we're thrilled about the response we're getting.
Okay. Question over here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm really concerned about the women voters. And watching last week in the Cuccinelli-McAuliffe debate there in McLean, it seemed like Mr. Cuccinelli didn't address the women voters enough. He's being so demonized as to abortion. He wants to do totally away with abortion rights and contraception. And it just really, I was hoping he would address this, and he didn't seem to. I feel like it's the women voters that put Mr. Obama back in office, okay, and kept Mr. Romney out. And from the demographics I'm hearing, the polls I'm hearing right now, it's the women that might sway this vote too. Can you address those situations? And it seems like I would like to hear y'all talk to women more and explain your situations, because the media is just all over this.
Well, we're going to. Now, look, understand something. We're a team. We support each other, but we're running separate campaigns. I really can't speak for Ken's campaign. He's got his own staff. I've got mine. I can tell you what we are doing. We're going to make sure that women, whether they're pro-life or not, that they understand something fundamental about me and about us. which is that there's never an excuse for disrespect or judging or condemning people. That's not what we do. I think sometimes it has come across that way. I'm not talking about with Ken, but in the pro-life movement, it's come across that way. I think we've got to help women understand that the position we take is a position based on love. Love for them as well as love for that unborn baby. I went to a school in, I won't even mention the county, but I went to a school and spoke there, and there was a very liberal woman there. Somebody told me, she's very liberal. She's probably hostile to the fact that you came. And the person said that she came to him later, said, I want to talk to you. And he thought, oh boy, here we go. Here we go. Why did you bring E.W. Jackson to the school? He said she shocked him. And she said, I like him. I can vote for him. And he said he was kind of shocked. And he said, why? Because you probably don't agree with him on much. She said, but I know he cares. I know he's going to always try to do things to help people, not to help himself. So I think, that old saying that we've had in the Christian community for a long time now, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. I think we've got to communicate that to people while never compromising on our convictions, communicate that to them. And I think we can take the edge off a lot of this war on women nonsense.
Okay. Last call.
Any comments on the federal shutdown and the impact on Virginia and any solutions?
Well, the first part of your question is a lot easier than the last. Look, it's horrible. It's horrible for Virginia. They've got to find a way to deal with this. Ultimately, this is going to have to be resolved at the ballot box. I don't see it being resolved any other way. But I would say this. I heard today that the National Institute of Health was treating 30 young girls for cancer, and that they are now being denied that treatment. And that Congress, I guess primarily the Republicans, I don't really care who it was, offered, well, Mr. President, can we at least fund this so that these kids can get the treatment that they need? And the answer was no, my way or the highway. I think we've all got to remember that this is about the people we're supposed to be serving. It's not about power. It's not about our position. It's about the people we're supposed to be serving. And I think, in fact, I suggested somewhat blithely, because I know it's not likely to happen, I said, maybe I should go up there and call a prayer meeting. Because it could not possibly get any worse. And our founding fathers often resorted to prayer at moments like this. And we certainly need some sort of divine, perhaps, intervention to bring folks together. So now, what solution do I have? Frankly, I'm too busy running for lieutenant governor right now, but I sure do want to see them solve it, particularly since Virginia depends upon the federal government for its economy to the tune of 40%. Where I'm from, Hampton Roads, 43, 44%. Northern Virginia, about 33%. So this is having a devastating impact. And by the way, before this, sequestration had impacted 90,000 Virginians already, 90,000. So this is devastating, and we've simply got to find a way to solve it. And by the way, look, I understand the motivation, because I feel that you cannot bury this country in debt year in and year out and there not be a day of reckoning. It's coming. And I think it's only responsible to try to stop that. We've got to find a way to do it that doesn't hurt so many people.
As president of Patrick Henry College, let me thank Marvin Olasky and E.W. Jackson. Let me thank all of you for being here. Also thank those who joined us via the webcast. And of course, in all of this, we are being joined by the over 400,000 readers of World Magazine, who will see the written version of this both in print and online. And also let me remind you, both those in person and those on the web, that tomorrow, if you come back at 12:40, Marvin Olasky will be interviewing Mark Leibovich, Chief National Correspondent for New York Times Magazine, right here in this same room. But once again, please give your thanks to Marvin Olasky and E.W. Jackson.